All right, criminal justice students, we're back to finish the actors in the courtroom. This is part 3. Part 1 covered the different types of courts, and then part 2 was the judge and the attorneys. We're going to finish up the attorneys and then look at the rest of the courtroom. Last week we talked about what the prosecuting attorney does, what the defense attorney does. We talked about attorney-client privilege, and today we're going to talk about attorney ethics, which is a very big part of being a lawyer. Some of the rules in criminal justice, the first one's pretty big. Obviously not concealing evidence, you have to make everything. But the big thing is called disclosure. The prosecution must bring all of their evidence to allow the defense to examine that evidence and be able to determine if it's authentic and be able to come up with a counter argument for that evidence. So they're obligated to prove or to give over that evidence to the defense attorney. Now, the timelines can vary depending on how much evidence you do have, but it must at some point be turned over. Also, witnesses must be, both sides actually have to give who their witnesses are going to be. You can't misrepresent evidence or mention tainted evidence if it wasn't allowed in court. If the judges ruled it wasn't allowed, you can't mention that. That could be not only lead to a mistrial or starting over the trial, but also lead to the prosecutor or the attorney being disbarred. And that can be both prosecution and defense attorney. In appeals cases, prosecutors can't, try to get revenge by having harsher sentencing. And defense attorneys must represent their client to the best of their ability, whether they are guilty or not guilty. Now, there's a lot more ethics involved in that, and if any of you are ever going to be an attorney, this is a very important lesson for you guys, and you'll actually take classes in law ethics. The other thing is, and we talked about this before, remember I told you that attorneys, whether they're the public defender or the high-priced defense attorneys, the big difference is resources, and this is probably one of the biggest resources. This is your defense investigators. For a public defender, they're going to get one, maybe investigator to share through 10 different attorneys. Law firms, private attorneys are going to have a number of investigators, and we'll see when we get to the O.J. Simpson case how important that is. But the private investigator's role is to go through all of the evidence and investigate beyond that point to try to come up with any way that the defense attorney can create a reasonable doubt when they present the case to the jury. They will go through police reports. Many of them are former policemen, so they know how to do that stuff. They'll go through the photographs. They'll go through, recreate the crime scene, a variety of different techniques, whatever they can do, so that they can create some kind of reasonable doubt when that defense attorney goes and presents their case in the courtroom. The next part is kind of quick. It's the court clerk. The court clerk is basically the Google for the judge. Their job is to keep all the files, keep all the evidence, make sure the judge is updated on all the laws, any pertinent information that the judge needs to know about. So this person works directly for the judge, and if you upset this person, you upset the judge, and you never want to do that. So if you're an attorney, you want to make sure you stay organized and you give that information properly, because again, you don't want to end up being on the judge's bad side in that case. The next part is obviously the witnesses. That's a big part of the case. Remember, this is only on the lowest level of court. Because of the Sixth Amendment, witnesses are allowed to testify in court, and they have to be cross-examined as well. This is known as the Confrontation Clause. It comes out of the Sixth Amendment, so that both sides have a chance to ask questions. A lot of times you will see the defendant or the accused never get on the stand because they don't want to be cross-examined by the prosecution. So a lot of high-profile cases like Casey Anthony, like O.J. Simpson when we see him, the defendant never got on the stand. But by doing this, the defendant can refute any kind of hearsay evidence. We'll talk about hearsay later on. That's basically things that are said about them. They can refute that if they do decide to get on the stand. Now, the one group of people that aren't that judges a lot of times will not force to get on the stand is our abused children, especially in abuse cases, but children in general. That doesn't mean that they can avoid the Sixth Amendment. Typically, what they'll do is they'll put the child in another room. They'll create a closed-circuit TV so everybody can watch, including the jury, including the defendant, and their attorney will ask them questions, but they're out of harm's way. They're not being intimidated by seeing the defendant again, something to that effect. So it's one that's supposed to keep the child safe and protected, and that's the one. Anything outside of that, the witness has to show up in court. That's when you see all those movies where they're knocking off the witnesses. Well, that's the reason is if they can't testify in court, then their testimony is not legitimate. So there are three kinds of witnesses that you will find in a court case. The first kind is known as the character witness. Their job is to talk about the defendant, their personality, their emotions, how they react in situations. If you're on if you're your side's character witness, you're going to tell how wonderful your witness is, how generous a person they are, how they would never do anything like this. On the other side, if you're the opposing counsel's character witness, you want to tell the other side of the story, the part that we don't see. They're not necessarily a nice person. They're not a generous person, whatever it may be. They don't typically add too much else to the case other than to give the jury an idea of who this who the accused person is. The second kind is the expert witness. The expert witness is typically in the scientific field. We're going to see this is very important in the OJ case. This was very important. This is what Dr. G would be in the Casey Anthony case. This is somebody who has professional knowledge, so it might be your medical examiner, it might be your police detective, it could be whatever their expertise is in. Typically, it's a science field, but they have important personal information or professional information that's going to help this case along. Unfortunately, a lot of times, when it comes to expert testimony, a lot of people don't understand all that scientific evidence, and sometimes they can confuse and that they don't understand it, and a lot of times when people don't understand it, they just tune it out. Here's what makes the big difference for the expert witness. They can take difficult information and make it easier for the jury to understand. They can speak in layman's terms. And the better your expert witness can do that, the more people will like them. And believe it or not, juries tend to vote for people they like, not necessarily always the people they believe or may have the better testimony, but it's people that they like. And so you may not have the best testimony, but if people like you and they can understand what you're saying, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt from that juror, and that is a very important part of the case, winning the jury over. And then the final one is the eyewitness. The eyewitness is somebody who has seen something or heard something or was present at the crime, whatever it may be. In the past, the eyewitness was the most relied upon of all the witnesses, but today it's probably more the expert with our world of CSI and getting a better understanding of the world of science, even though it didn't work out for Casey Anthony. It did work out for her, actually. Most jurors depend on the testimony of the eyewitness as reliable information. Unfortunately, since we're not in class, we can't take the eyewitness test. But what we found is that most of the eyewitness testimony is actually pretty unreliable. A lot of times your brain will fill in information. It's a panic situation, so you're not getting all the attention to detail. What was the height? What was the weight? What were they wearing? People see different things. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to do a case where you're going to see that there's a shooting and you have 30-some witnesses that saw 27 different things. And which one are you supposed to believe? Who's right and who's wrong? So as far as the eyewitness is concerned, their testimony, while we tend to believe them because they said they saw it, tends to be less than accurate. And that's why we've seen more people listening to the expert witnesses today than ever before. And then the final part is our jury. The jury is obviously selected from everyday people. They can range from anywhere from, basically anybody that fits the qualifications to be a juror. So let's take a look at our jury. Remember, only the lower levels of state and federal courts have the jury trial. There is something called a grand jury. We'll talk about that next week. Grand jury is to decide if there's enough evidence to go to the case, and they'll issue an indictment. The one you're more familiar with is the petit jury, or the small jury. That is a group of 12, and we'll talk more about that. How do you become a juror? Well, there's actually pretty simple qualifications. Most people thought it was to register to vote, so a lot of people don't register to vote. That's not true anymore in Pennsylvania. It's actually a driver's license, 18 years old, U.S. citizen, being able to understand the English language, and you cannot be convicted of a felony. There's a lot of misnomers about jury duty, and most of those are not true. If you're called for jury duty, you actually have to follow the process, or you can be found in contempt of court, and the judge may give you a nice $1,000 fine for not showing up. So if you ever do get that information, don't blow it off. Make sure you follow the instructions that are given to you in that envelope, and that you report to Norristown when you need to. Then you go through the jury selection process, is known as voir dire, or voir dire, depending on what part of the country you're in. And so if you're called into jury duty, they're going to ask you questions about the case. They're going to remove you if you know anyone that's involved in the case, or they're going to remove you if you're familiar with the case, too familiar with the case. And then they're going to ask you questions, and both sides are going to try to find the best 12 jurors to win their case. People will always say, oh, well, you're trying to find unbiased people. Not if you're an attorney or not. You're trying to find 12 people that will be more favorable to either your version of the truth or the opposing side's version of the truth for them. So you want people that are going to sympathize with your cause. So, for example, Casey Anthony, in that jury, you want mothers who are going to be very angry that this child is dead, grandmothers, people that are not going to sympathize with Casey Anthony at all. If you're Casey Anthony's attorney, Jose Baez, you wanted younger people. That was a big push to have a younger person who is going to be more sympathetic toward Casey Anthony and her causes. So ultimately, you want to pick, and both sides are going to try to ultimately find people that favor their side. Most of those will get weeded out, and ultimately, you'll probably end up with 12 unbiased jurors, or pretty close to it. And notice PA does require a magic number of 12. Now, there are, during that voir dire process, there can be reasons that you're excused from the jury, including challenge for cause. Again, if you know somebody or you may have a bias in the case, the judge may dismiss you for that. Preemptory challenges when an attorney excuses you, and they really don't have to have a reason. It cannot be proven that they use race or gender or religion as a reason, but you can preempt any jury you want. You only get so many, so you can't preempt everybody. But the bigger the case, the more challenges you get. And then there's also one called a Batson challenge. If you believe that the attorney is discriminating when they're dismissing jurors, you can challenge that. Now, for you psych people, I know we don't talk a lot about psych professions in here, but one of the biggest psych professions going right now is what's called the jury consultant. The jury consultant's job is to come in there, and they will go through people's Facebook and backgrounds, and they will, basically look at the lives of these people to determine if they're bringing any presuppositions into the case, things that will help or hurt your case, and they will help the attorney to remove jurors or want to keep jurors. Jury consultants use their intuition, their expertise in human behavior. They'll watch people as they're being questioned and how they answer. And it's a very lucrative profession if you can be good at it. They'll make mock trials for the attorneys, create focus group to make a strategy. They'll do a lot of different things to help the attorneys to present their case that much better. During the trial, they'll monitor the reactions of the juror, body language, facial expressions. That actually was very important in the Casey Anthony case, watching that stuff. And ultimately, the jury's job is to deliberate and decide the outcome of the trial. So that's our actors in the courtroom. and we'll see you next week when we